Okay, great stuff. I think everyone is dialed in now. Good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to today's Leaf Surgery. My name's Will Sibley. I'm really pleased to be introducing you to today's session. For people in the audience who haven't attended Leaf Surgery before, Leaf Surgery is a monthly online webinars delivered by the Leaf team to keep in touch with our members and wider audiences. And usually these sessions fall on the second Friday of every month from September to May. The focus of these sessions alternate around different themes that are relevant to the food and farming industries, and we're joined by brilliant guest speakers for each of these sessions to talk about these topics. For today's surgery, we are focusing on scaling up agroforestry, and of course, agroforestry being the integration of trees into agricultural enterprises, which adds diversity and further complexity to farms, as well as having a whole range of multifunctional benefits for farming systems. So it's a really exciting and important topic at the moment. And we want to pose the question of how economic, practical and cultural factors could influence the scaling up of agroforestry across the UK farming landscape. We're joined by a brilliant speaker, James Ramskir-Gardiner, the National Agroforestry Advisor at Forestry Commission. Huge welcome to you, James. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we'll hear more about your background in the talk, so look forward to speaking with you. And we're also joined by Eleanor Marks from Leaf, who works in our integrated farm management team, to kick us off with a quick introduction to the topic in the perspective of integrated farm management, and to share some details on a new upcoming project opportunity at Leaf, which is very exciting. So welcome to you too, Eleanor. And before I hand over to her, we really enjoy engaging with our audience in these sessions. And it's great to see lots of faces, as well, lots of new ones and familiar ones too. So big welcome to you all. We'd really like to hear from you, so please do submit your comments and questions via the chat function, which should be somewhere on the bottom right of your window. And we've saved some time at the end for a Q&A. So thank you, sit back and relax and enjoy the session. And over to you, Eleanor.
Thanks so much, Will. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us today. So just in the context of integrated farm management, which is a whole farm holistic approach, agroforestry is certainly a really important part of this and fits into many different aspects of our IFM principles. So agroforestry can come in a range of forms with really diverse and positive impacts, as well as well-known multifunctional benefits on farm. So for example, fodder and shelter for livestock, soil protection, and even diversification like or crops such as top fruit. And there are many other benefits and opportunities for farmers and agroforestry. And agroforestry has been demonstrated and is currently being demonstrated by a range of brilliant farms across the country, many of which we've worked with and are working with currently within our network. It's also really well researched by people we've worked with, such as Forest Research, who we continue to collaborate with after projects such as the S2.E5 project, as well as the Forestry Commission and even various leaf innovation centres such as Rothamsted and Bangor University. So it's a really interesting space to be in, and it's great to be part of events where farming and forestry industries can come together. So for example, last year we were at the Institute of Chartered Foresters conference and the Agroforestry show, which really added a wealth of knowledge and opportunities for collaboration going forward. And what's interesting is that currently only 3% of farmland is dedicated to agroforestry at the moment. And so Leaf, amongst many others, are really keen to continue working collaboratively to understand how we can scale this up. And we're really looking forward to hearing from James and working together in the near future on this. So going forward, I'm really delighted to announce that we have a new project supported by the Linda Foundation, which aims to equip 8 farmers with the knowledge, skills and confidence to pursue agroforestry in a form of their choosing on their farm. So we're opening up for applicants today. So please do get in touch with me. I'll put my email in the chat. And people involved can expect a really highly collaborative experience working with experts to really understand how they can best implement agroforestry on their farm and plan it for the long term. So yeah, I'll hand back over to you, Will. But yeah, any questions, just let me know. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helena. Yeah, great intro to our perspective and really exciting opportunity. So yeah, any in the audience who are interested, please do get in touch with us. Want to hear from you. Great. So we'll get stuck into the conversation. So thanks again, James, for joining us. I just wanted to ask if you kick us off with telling us more about you and what you do at Forestry Commission.
Thank you, Will, and thank you, Leaf, for having me. It's great to be here. So who am I? Wow, this is, that's a deep question. I guess we'll focus on the tree aspect of me. So I am the National Agroforestry Advisor for the Forestry Commission. So that means I kind of cover and look after all of England. I've kind of roughly got two halves to my role. The first bit is working with the rest of my team at the Forestry Commission, along with DEFRA and Natural England, to design and create the agroforestry grant offers that are coming through with ELMS, along with the kind of regulatory side of things that will help manage and enable people to do agroforestry in England. The other half of my role is effectively to support and upskill forestry and farming sector to do agroforestry in whatever form that takes. So I do a mixture of events such as this. I do a lot of educational work and guest lecturing, kind of working with sector capacity colleagues to look at designing training and basically ensuring the resources are out there for people to learn and to be able to do agroforestry in all its forms. So it's a relatively small job. I'm not expecting it to take me long to get it all sorted.
Yeah, have confidence. Small job, whole of England. It's okay. Great, thank you very much for that. It sounds like a really diverse, like agroforestry, a really diverse role with lots of different approaches and angles to kind of add to this brilliant momentum that's happening across the UK and beyond. And on that momentum that's developing at the moment, you've your government body, and that, of course, policy is changing, but also this kind of momentum is happening through farmers, NGOs, and they have some great lively debates and demonstration around agroforestry right now. Can you just give us a kind of outline or picture of where agroforestry is now in the UK, and I guess putting the main question of the surgery to you from the off of how it can become more widespread and larger scale across the farming landscape?
Yeah, sure. So as Eleanor said, agroforestry, it's currently, it's reported it's only on about 3% of our agricultural land in the UK. I guess you could argue we potentially have a lot more agroforestry in the country than that 3% might show. It really comes down to what your definition of agroforestry is. That term agroforestry is relatively new. It's only maybe 30, 40, 50 years old as an academic phrase. Before we would just call it farming, and our farming landscape involved a lot more trees than it currently does. So I'd say you could say we have a lot more agroforestry in the country when you start considering things such as our hedgerows, our shelter belts, our riparian buffers, wood pasture, and our orchards. All of these in my mind are agroforestry elements. But certainly for in-field agroforestry that you might typically think of, you think rows of trees with crops or grass in between. Yeah, we're it's pretty niche still in this country, but it is certainly building momentum and interest, though, especially when you consider things such as input prices are skyrocketing on farms. Our climate is getting more and more extreme and unpredictable. I guess the only thing predictable about our weather is that it's not going to be the same. We as a kind of land managing group, whether farming, forestry, rivers, whatever, are really waking up to the role that trees can play in our farming landscape, kind of beyond traditional woodlands and forestry. How we go about this, farmers have clearly told us, to be fair, that the only way that agroforestry is ever going to become more widespread is that there's two things, really. One is that there is really good practical advice and guidance on how to do it. You know, that there's no getting around the fact agroforestry is complex. You know, farming is complex, forestry is complex, and we are combining the two to make an even more complex system. You know, so having that really solid, accessible guidance and advice is going to be really key. So that's number one. And number two simply comes down to there being the financial support to do so. You know, as I mentioned, with input prices skyrocketing, it's a really tough financial time to be involved in farming and all land management activities, to be fair, but especially in farming. So to get people to effectively take almost a leap of faith into trying out something new to them, that there needs to be that financial support behind them to try and help minimize that risk.
Great, yeah, thank you. You know, and it's there's so many things to touch on there, and of course the finance being really important, and of course in recent years different mechanisms that are out there for financing agroforestry. I wondered if you could elaborate on that more so with climate change in mind, as you've touched on, in that multifunctional benefits around that comes with agroforestry in the context of climate change, from, you know, soil health and productivity, and the biodiversity element to it all, that trees can bring, or more trees on farms could bring. With that in mind, and the weather changing more so now and in the future, how can agroforestry be designed to bring better resilience in that respect, as well as what would be the role of finance in making that happen?
So I would always start with how agroforestry can support and enhance the farming that you want to do. You know, whether that's the farming practice you currently have, or if you want to kind of shift into a slightly different practice. That for me has always got to be the very first question, is effectively, what do you want from it? You know, do you want to be able to enhance the farming that you're doing? So, for example, you know, cattle farmers, you know, they could massively reduce the length, if not completely eliminate the time needed for cattle to be in sheds over winter. You know, and you could do this with a combination of a silver pasture system to provide shelter and forage for the livestock, importantly to help them maintain like a live weight, like a healthy live weight gain. You know, it's shown in several studies now that for every, you know, livestock have a temperature range that they effectively grow at best, and for every degree either above or below that, you know, whether they're too hot or too cold, it takes 3 or 4% more feed just to maintain that weight, let alone putting any on. So if you think about a farm, you know, farm is a business. You know, for a farm to be sustainable, it needs to make a profit. You know, you need to be able to pay the farmer, support the farm family, support the farm workers, support future investment into the farm. You know, profit shouldn't be a dirty word. You know, that farm needs to be profitable. So by being able to, you know, minimize the loss of live weight gain, or to improve that live weight gain, that would be a massive benefit to the farm. And I would view that as making the farm more resilient. So with that example, by a system like that, you could help keep your livestock out on the hill far longer through the winter, if not throughout all of the winter. But that would also be in combination with probably a more rotational grazing system, to help manage the sward and the ground condition underfoot, So like trees have agroforestry tree systems can have a really big role to play in that example, but it's not a silver bullet. It needs to work in conjunction with the other farming practices that go along with it. An arable farmer, for example, they could greatly improve their drought resistance of their crops, rather than focusing necessarily on irrigation to get through drought periods, which is really costly, a huge time sink, they could focus on minimizing the water loss of their crops rather than necessarily looking to add additional water into there. And this would just be through really reducing the evapotranspiration that happens. So a tree row system, for example, would greatly reduce the wind speeds going across that arable field, and thus reducing the moisture lost by really some quite dramatic amounts. The tree roots themselves will massively help with intercepting rainfall, allowing that rain to go further and deeper into the soil and holding it into place, so that both the tree and the crops have more of a reserve to pull on during those drought periods. I think one of the most interesting facts about the way our climate is changing is that on the whole, across the year, the amount of rainfall we're going to receive isn't dramatically going to change. The level of rainfall we receive the year is going to be about the same. It's just how we're receiving that rainfall. So instead of nice, long, continuous, drizzle throughout large periods of the year, where that can be slowly absorbed into our ground and handled by our waterways and such, you're going to get these short, sharp periods of very heavy wet weather and then huge periods of dry. So to me, the answer is to manage and maintain the water we are getting far better rather than looking to continuously add, which again is very costly, both in a money sense and a time sense. With that, we've also got lots of interesting reports where the yields of the crops actually improve closer to the tree rows. And this is in part to the shade and shelter benefited from those tree rows, but also we can't overlook the role that introducing a fungal component into our soils can play by improving growth. Trees create effectively mycorrhizal fungi in the soil, and the majority of our agricultural soil is bacterial based rather than fungal based. So introducing that fungal component can really massively improve the growth of whatever else is in that soil. And that same logic applies to grass. Grass under trees will come into flush much earlier in the spring. It will weather drought far better than grass out in the open, meaning that your livestock are going to kind of suffer less through these dry periods. There's also, when you think about resilience, I touched on profit, you can think about financial resilience of the farm as well. And this can be by growing and selling additional products on the farm, whether this is fruit or nut based, for example, using multiple different orchard type systems. Nuts, I certainly think, will probably be a popular choice. As a nation, we consume quite a lot of nuts, but we import almost all of them. We grow very, very little of the kind of nuts that we consume as a nation. And nuts can be a really key and healthy kind of source of protein. So I certainly can see the kind of nut orchard system proving popular. But that could also be, I'll hold my hand up. I'm not a farmer. I'm a forester. I spent 10 plus years dealing with trees, and trees grow this little thing called timber, which is really important to our country. You know, until recently, we were the second largest net importer of timber in the world. I guess I'm glad to say we've moved down to third now. Where, you know, the USA has overtaken us, but we still import something like 80% of the timber that we use as a country. Now, I'm not saying we're going to fill that 80% through growing timber on, you know, in amongst our farming, but we can certainly do a bit to help towards that and to help provide timber resources for our local areas. You know, this could be something as simple as firewood, for example, something we import a huge amount of. Or it could be growing really quality hardwood timber, especially if you, as a farmer, have some more kind of long-term aspirations with what you plant. You know, but they could be as short as 40 years, you know, to get a quality timber product, depending on the species. Which for me as a forester, 40 years is a very short time period. You know, I appreciate for a farmer that's, you know, we do have different ideas of time periods of what's short and long. You know, 40 years is short for me, but, you know, that's almost half a career for a farmer. But again, it seems criminal that we're not already maybe doing some of these things. You know, climatically, we're so well suited for growing quality hardwood timber. You know, we do have, you know, a couple of issues that need to go along with that, such as grey squirrels and deer populations, both of which are far higher than they should be in this country. Again, that I would argue that's kind of more down to where we as land managers of all kind of flavors have missed the step a tad. On the financial support side, as I've mentioned, it's one of the two most important things for farmers for uptaking and for experimenting with agroforestry. I'll caveat this: all my knowledge is very England focused, I'm afraid. You know, that there are systems in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. They're not things I know a huge amount about, I'm afraid. But certainly in England, we've got some really brilliant financial support in the country. This could be from local community forestry organisations, for example. So up in Northumberland, where I am, we have the Great Northumberland Forest, who are doing some absolutely amazing work funding and supporting farmers to create agroforestry. I know down the opposite end, Forest for Cornwall, complete opposite end of the country, are also doing some really brilliant, you know, supporting work for farms to do agroforestry, both financially and with guidance and advice. You've got organisations such as the Woodland Trust, who provide quite a lot of funding for trees on farms, and has certainly done some really great work across the country. And then you've got, you know, shameless plug, you've got the Forestry Commission, you've got Natural England, both providing financial support for doing different types of agroforestry systems. Where I think the most exciting thing coming up, though, is the new agroforestry offer coming through ELMS. This is going to be launching in summer this year, and this is going to really support from both a upfront cost for trees, tubes, guarding, fencing, you know, what have you, for that initial capital outlay, as well as providing a really generous and well thought out kind of revenue offer each year, alongside the guidance and advice from myself and my team and Natural England's team as well, to do so. Private finance kind of obviously has a role to play in this, and there are schemes across the country that have been financed kind of privately, whether that's been by the farmer or landowner themselves, or in combination with effectively a sponsor. That's absolutely a really valid way of going about doing a system, especially if you want to have the real flexibility to effectively do whatever you want. But all of those systems are going to be a kind of a bespoke individual agreement, you know, between the farmer and whoever is providing that finance.
Great, thank you so much. So much, also many benefits you've gone through there, in particularly in terms of climate change, and just the array of supports that's happening through organisations such as yours, and financially, which I'm guessing that the kind of picture that the barriers and bottlenecks for farmers in terms of getting involved with agroforestry could be. It's a long-term investment. It's seeing those benefits might take a while, but to get it established, there's quite a lot of cost involved there. So perhaps that's been a barrier so far, but that might be changing, and through different support and engagement with each other, that's kind of changing now, which is great news, I think. Brilliant. And then moving on to maybe that leads on to maybe a cultural shift. Do you think, or in your work and your team's work, are you seeing this kind of cultural or mindset shift across the industry around agroforestry and collaboration through different sectors in the industry that is helping or supporting more progression towards this type of farming?
Yeah, absolutely. So, rightly so, farmers can get really, and I'm going to, apologies up front, I'm going to talk in vague generalizations. This won't apply to everyone, but as a generalization goes, farmers can get quite wary when you talk or you start speaking about putting trees onto the farm, and rightly so, because there have been some examples across the UK where farms have gone up for sale, and they have been bought up and wholesale converted to woodland, or you've got cases where tenant farmers have not had their tenancies renewed, so the landlord can get that farm back in hand, and again predominantly plant almost all of that farm up into woodland. I should caveat that with woodland isn't the enemy here. Again, I'm biased, I'm a forester, but woodland isn't the enemy. But that doesn't mean I certainly don't believe personally that we should be converting entire farms to woodland. But those examples, that they are few and far between, thankfully, but they do make a very large impact when they occur. So we are talking, certainly that I know of, maybe, at most maybe half a dozen cases across the UK where this has happened, which is very few when you consider there's something like 80,000 plus individual farming businesses across the country. But they make a very, very big impact when they occur. So, that's the kind of the setting stone, is that, there can be a lot of wariness around talking about trees. But I really believe that the mindset shift can only really take place if we demonstrate the positive beneficial roles that trees can play on the farm. But that's the key thing, is that they can contribute to the farm business rather than replacing it. And that, I think, has got to really be the key message for almost all forms of agroforestry, is that they are there to contribute and support the farm, not replace it. And I will go to my retirement, which is hopefully many decades in the future, banging on that drum. That is such a key point, and I think one that can get lost very quickly when we go into detail. Thankfully, we've got events such as the Agroforestry Open Weekend in May, which are really growing in popularity. With, there's more and more farms effectively signing up and opening their gates each year for people to come and see what they're doing, and to talk to talk to them, talk to the people who are doing these systems, whether it's sites such as Wakelins or Little Hidden Farm in Berkshire, where they've been working with what we think of as agroforestry for something like 30 to 35 years, all the way through to multiple farms I know of now around the country who aren't even a year in, and you've got people kind of along that spectrum, and you can go and you can talk to people about how their experience, what their experience has been, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and the openness that I've seen with so many of the farmers who have these systems to share their knowledge and experience has been absolutely amazing. And that peer-to-peer learning, I think, is going to be so crucial for supporting that cultural shift, a kind of across mainstream farming. Last year we had the debut agroforestry show, which was an absolute resounding success. Sold out tickets on both days. The tents were packed with talks. The design clinic slots were fully booked up for people to come and get bespoke one-on-one advice on how to implement an agroforestry system. Agroforestry is becoming more and more prevalent in the agricultural world. It's becoming a bigger force within all of the shows that happen across the country throughout the year. The shows, they're dedicating time and space to this subject. That shift is already underway. It's maybe not happening as quickly as I and others in the industry would like, but it is happening, and it will gather momentum, especially when, these kind of more established grant schemes come out later in the year. As I said, farmers have told us directly the two things they need to be able to do this, and that is guidance and advice and financial support. And that's exactly what we're going to be providing. So the hope is that does the trick. That really gets the momentum building. Like, as I said, the shift is already underway. It's going from a niche activity undertaken by only like small scale regenerative farms across the country, to having some really large scale kind of traditionally commercial farms undertaking agroforestry schemes. I think of Stephen Briggs, for example, in Cambridgeshire. He's got currently the largest silver arable system in the country. It's a 50-hectare site, dedicated solely to growing trees along with his crops. And the benefits that he has seen are unbelievable. And, Stephen is an amazing champion for the industry, because he is so generous with sharing his knowledge and experience of both what has and hasn't worked. And that's so important, and that openness is so key, to helping that shift happen. It's really for people like Stephen and us in the industry to help continue with this momentum, to build upon it and to support those who are kind of new to this idea of planting trees in amongst their farming. Even if that's just talking, if you're doing agroforestry yourself, even if that's just talking to your neighboring farm, discuss your own system, point out the benefits you're getting from it, point out what isn't quite working, and just help guide them and direct, even if that's just guiding them to an advisor. It's just it's on us to build the system and world that we want to see.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I couldn't agree with you more of what you just said on the first point of it doesn't have to be this, it's that, or it's this. Agroforestry can be a tool for farmers to use, and be integrated into the farming system, as what Leaf, our approach is integrated farm management. It can be one part of a sustainable farming system. And then, of course, the power of knowledge exchange and the huge value that different people can get from just being curious and understanding other approaches and stories of how they got there and how they can relate that to them. So really important things you just said there. So thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for asking you questions, James, from me. You'll be happy to know, and we'll move on to the Q&A. I see that the chat's been going quite a bit. So over to you, Eleanor, to fire a few of those at James.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for your questions. There's a really great range. I'll just start off with the first one, really, which is about how does the UK compare to other countries in terms of the adoption of agroforestry, such as the US and Australia, or countries with a larger land mass. How are we doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So The short version is I think we're quite far behind, basically. You certainly look to the continent. There's a much bigger and more long-standing kind of integration of trees with farming. You then look to, so certainly North America, both in Canada and the USA, have got some quite large-scale agroforestry systems. Some really impressive work and resources available from them. China, interestingly, has a very large kind of agroforestry presence. Australia, admittedly, I'm not aware, not something I'm too aware of. I do try and focus a lot of my time on temperate systems. So obviously you go further south towards the equator into the more tropical regions. Tropical agroforestry is almost the bread and butter of a lot of agriculture in countries such as that. And it's certainly stuff I learned about at uni, but it's not something I look too much into through work, just because it's so very different to the temperate-based systems that we work with up here. But yeah, short answer is we've got some catching up to do. Mm-hmm. But that is what I will drag us up to, whether kicking or screaming,
Sounds good. Great. So the next one is just on how do we decide if we know how land is best used for agroforestry, and perhaps the form of agroforestry that might be best suited to particular crops or management practices, or even livestock as well, I think, which comes into that.
Yeah. So I'd kind of, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I would start. You need to start with what you want from the land. What do you want? What's your farming objective? And then that's where you start. And then absolutely the next step is then to, evaluate the land you have and what that can best support. So the first place you start is soil. You've got to start with your soil. If you're farming, you almost already are. Like soil is where you need to start. Now, how soil is kind of analyzed and thought of is different in forestry compared to agriculture, and that's a whole interesting tangent of it itself, which I won't go now. Thankfully, you'll be thankful to hear. But you need to start with your soil. So this is why I always think you need to start with your objective first, rather than thinking, I want to grow this system, or I want to plant this system or this design, because that design and system might not be suited to your farm, to your objective, to your landscape. You got to start with your objective, then you analyze your land and see how you can marry those two together. But this is where the role of the kind of the guidance and advice role comes in. As I said, these are complex systems, and that there's quite a few avenues to kind of go down. A really great place to start is the Agroforestry Handbook from the Soil Association. It's an absolutely brilliant resource to start with. It gives such a comprehensive overview of lots of different types of systems and outcomes you can have from them, so you can get a really good feel of what you might think suits your farming system.
Mm-hmm. Great. That leads quite nicely on. I'm afraid we've got time for only one more question, which sort of covers how you think farmer-facing organisations such as LEAF and others can best assist in promoting better understanding and perhaps a practical application of agroforestry to our audiences.
That is a good question. I think be open. I'm not saying LEAF isn't. Obviously, you are. Hence why we're all here. But LEAF and other organisations such as yourselves, being really open to having people from outside of farming actually coming in and providing maybe different viewpoints in different context. That's really what brought me into agroforestry, was a real kind of passion and belief into integrated land management. We are a small island with 70 million people on it. The way we use our land has to be really thoughtful and efficient. for, you know, situations like this with agroforestry, where you can get multiple products and benefits from the same land rather than only getting one from here and another from over there, you know, I think is such a key, you know, it's a really key aspect of what interests me in the area. So I think certainly for farming focused organizations, is that being more open to people from outside of the farming industry to come in and give their views and context, and to talk about the possibilities and potentials that they see working alongside the farm.
Great, thank you. And yeah, sorry to everyone we didn't get to in terms of your questions, but yeah, thanks so much for those answers, James. They're really interesting, and perhaps we can forward on some of these other questions. But we'll be, as a bit of a plug, as again, we'll be addressing them in a range of opportunities with this agroforestry project, which we're really looking forward to working with you, James, as it comes up. So yeah, I'll hand over back to Will, but thanks again so much for your time, James, and answering all the questions from the chat.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's all we have time for. And thank you so much, James, from everything that you've said in the discussion and your answers, as well as the huge number of comments and questions we've had in from the audience. I think that just shows what a exciting topic, and how curious and interested people are, and the potential around it that different stakeholders feel on agroforestry, I think is brilliant. So thank you very much, everyone, and thanks very much to Eleanor, of course, for the Q&A and the information at the beginning around what Leaf is doing around agroforestry and a new project coming up. So that's exciting. And then, lastly, thank you to our audience again for joining. Hope to see you again. As I said, we have these every second Friday of the month. So please do look out for information on our next surgery in March. So I'll let everyone get on with their days, and see you again soon.